Madison's backyard wedding rehearsal was shut down by an HOA letter 2 days before the big day. Behind it stood Beverly Caldwell, a joyless board president known for crushing anything heartfelt with fine print. But Madison's fiancé was a sheriff's deputy, and together they staged a ceremony that rewrote the rules on Beverly's own turf. Just wait until you hear how this love story turned the tables and left an entire neighborhood cheering for justice. Madison Hayes had dreamed of this moment since she was 16, standing beneath the wide arms of her mother's oak tree, the same tree she'd grown up climbing barefoot in the summers, now strung with fairy lights and burlap ribbon. Her backyard wasn't just a patch of grass. It was home, history, and heart. And after 10 years of long-distance love with Tyler, him serving as a deputy and National Guardsman, her working grueling night shifts as a trauma nurse, this rehearsal was more than a run-through. It was the start of something peaceful. Finally. She'd spent months planning every detail with quiet devotion. No planners, no extravagance. Just family, pulled pork, sweet tea, and a folding table covered in handwritten name cards. She filed her permits with the county, double-checked sound ordinances, even mapped out where guests could park so they wouldn't block driveways. Madison believed in playing by the rules, maybe because life had never given her the luxury of bending them. Then, 2 days before the rehearsal, an envelope appeared, hand-delivered to her porch in the middle of the afternoon. It wasn't from the county. It was from the HOA. Inside was a typed, cold letter. This communication serves as formal notice that your planned event constitutes an unauthorized assembly on residential land. As no architectural or usage variance was submitted to the HOA board, this activity is in violation of Section 8.3 of the Community Guidelines. Cease and desist immediately. Further action may involve private enforcement or legal escalation. Madison read it twice, then a third time. Her hands trembled. It wasn't just a warning, it was a shutdown, a declaration that the one simple joy she had carved out of a decade of distance and sacrifice was now considered a threat to community standards. The signature at the bottom read, Beverly Caldwell, HOA Board President. Beverly. Of course it was Beverly. The same woman who once ticketed her neighbor for leaving up holiday lights past January. The same woman who made a widow repaint her house for being 2 shades off regulation beige. Madison stepped back from the porch, staring out at the yard where rows of white folding chairs had already been placed. Tyler's cousin had offered to play guitar. Her aunt had baked cupcakes. Everything was ready. And now, it was all in limbo. She held the notice in one hand, the printed rehearsal programs in the other. A few pages fluttered in the breeze like surrender flags. This wasn't about noise complaints. It wasn't about permits. It was personal. Beverly Caldwell had spent most of her life balancing spreadsheets, and when she retired, she simply redirected that obsessive order toward something she could control without permission, her neighbors. She didn't hate people, at least not openly. She hated noise, colorful mailboxes, swing sets left out past dusk, wind chimes, celebrations, flags, and above all, any moment that wasn't pre-approved and silent. Her reign as HOA president was legendary for all the wrong reasons. She once fined an 83-year-old veteran for flying the Stars and Stripes on Memorial Day because, in her words, patriotism doesn't exempt anyone from protocol. Another time, she cited a neighbor for painting their mailbox sunflower yellow, a shade she described as emotionally invasive. To her, compliance wasn't about safety or standards. It was about control. And Madison's wedding rehearsal? That was a personal affront to the little empire Beverly had built from bylaws and intimidation. When Madison received the notice, she didn't scream or storm over. She walked calmly to Beverly's door with a binder in hand. Permits, documents, proof that everything was above board. She asked for a conversation. Beverly opened her door, but not her mind. Madison offered compromises. "We can shorten the rehearsal," she said softly. "We'll keep music low. Guests will carpool to limit traffic." Beverly didn't blink. "If you love him that much," she said, lips tight in a rehearsed smile, You can rehearse in the parking lot at Walmart. It's out of our jurisdiction. That wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. A woman who had never missed a community board meeting, who hadn't lost a loved one in a uniform or waded through deployments, who'd never worked a night shift in an understaffed ICU, was now dictating whether or not a military couple could stand in their backyard and say practice vows. Word spread fast across the neighborhood. A few whispered sympathy in passing. A couple left flowers at Madison's porch without signing their names, but no one openly stood up. Beverly had fined people for putting trash bins out early. What might she do to someone who hosted a backyard gathering in defiance? Madison walked her yard that night in silence. The lights in the trees felt dimmer. The chairs looked out of place, like guests that had been uninvited. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was furious. And Beverly? That evening she trimmed her roses in her front garden, carefully shaping each bloom like it were a matter of national policy. She hummed as she worked, satisfied that order had been restored. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't begin to imagine, was that she had just picked a fight with the wrong bride, and this wedding wasn't going to be moved. It was going to make history. Tyler West didn't raise his voice when Madison showed him the HOA's letter. He didn't slam his fist down or make threats. He simply read it once, then again, his jaw tightening as the weight of every sentence settled in. "She's violating basic civil rights under the false authority of a civil covenant," he said, voice low and steady, the kind of calm that came from years of training, from moving through unstable regions overseas with nothing but a mission and a map. He'd seen chaos. He'd handled worse. But this petty targeted attack on his fiancée, on their family, on something so pure as a backyard rehearsal, was different. This wasn't war. This was something colder, manufactured cruelty wrapped in policy. And Tyler knew exactly how to respond. He didn't argue. He didn't call Beverly. He started making calls of his own. By the next morning, neighbors awoke to the unmistakable sight of county sheriff patrol cars, not flashing lights, not sirens, just respectfully parked in a legal row near the HOA's common area. There was no drama, just presence. Calm, unmistakable presence. Out of the first car stepped Tyler, dressed in uniform. Out of the next, his captain, retired now, but still a legend in the department. Then came two off-duty deputies in full dress, and last, a county circuit judge, robe folded neatly over his arm, eyes kind but focused. These weren't strangers. Each of them had their own reasons for being there. A shared deployment with Tyler, a life saved by Madison in the ER, a wedding they believed should go on no matter what a clipboard-wielding HOA president thought. They gathered not at Madison's house, but on the HOA's shared patio, a concrete space behind the clubhouse that technically belonged to every resident in the neighborhood. Since the HOA hadn't officially reserved it for any activity, it was open use. First come, first served. Madison walked onto the patio with slow, sure steps. Her dress was simple, a cotton sundress that caught the breeze, boots that scuffed slightly against the pavement. Her hair was pinned with the same wildflowers that had been meant for the arbor out back. Tyler waited for her at the end of a makeshift aisle marked only by folding chairs and quiet respect. No music played, no announcements were made. But the image, the flags on shoulders, the sun glinting off polished badges, the silence that fell over the cul-de-sac, said more than any sound ever could. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some opened their doors and stepped out. No one stopped them. A few sat down quietly in the back rows, unsure if they were allowed to stay. When Deputy Walker, Tyler's closest friend and one of the off-duty officiants, began reading from a ceremonial script approved by the judge, the tension in the neighborhood shifted. What had been fear turned into reverence. The moment was real, and it was happening whether Beverly approved or not. Some people clapped quietly. One woman across the street teared up and pressed her hand over her heart. Another saluted. No one dared to interfere. This wasn't just a rehearsal anymore. This was a statement, a reclaiming, a refusal to let pettiness silence love. Beverly Caldwell hadn't seen the patrol cars when they arrived. She'd been inside, reviewing gardening violations and drafting an email about unapproved stepping stones, in a neighbor's side yard. So, when the low hum of respectful applause drifted through her window, she pulled back the curtain and froze. There, right outside her own patio, were uniformed officers, a seated crowd, and Madison Hayes walking down the HOA's shared space as if it were the center aisle of a chapel. In her slippers and a floral robe, Beverly stormed out the sliding glass door, clutching a manila folder full of HOA bylaws like it was a legal weapon. "This is trespassing," she snapped. "This is unauthorized use of community space. I will be contacting the HOA attorney, the sheriff's office, and—" But no one was listening. Deputy Walker's voice cut through the sunset air, calm and unwavering. "Madison Marie Hayes, do you promise to stand beside Tyler in both order and chaos, in storms and in stillness, as long as there is breath in your lungs?" The crowd fell into silence. Madison nodded, eyes wet, voice clear. "I do." And when they kissed, not as protesters, not as rebels, but as two people deeply in love, Beverly's outrage collapsed into irrelevance. Her voice, full of sputtered threats and shaky finger-pointing, was no match for the power of a community that had decided it was done being afraid. The moment was captured in a single photo. Tyler in uniform, Madison in boots, the flag waving gently above them, and neighbors smiling in quiet solidarity. By morning, the local paper had run the image on the front page, the headline, "When Love Meets Law, a Wedding Rehearsal Saved by the Sheriff." The article detailed not only the ceremony, but also the growing discontent with the HOA's board, particularly its pattern of intimidation, arbitrary fines, and unneighborly conduct. Residents began sharing their own stories. A grandfather fined for placing a rocking chair on his porch, a new mom ticketed for hanging a baby swing from a tree. Complaints poured into the county office. Within 48 hours, the county commissioner's office issued a statement confirming a formal review of the HOA's recent actions. Several citations had been issued without proper notice or due process, in direct violation of residents' rights. Beverly was asked to temporarily relinquish her duties while the investigation proceeded. She called it an overreaction. Most of the neighborhood called it overdue. The week of the actual wedding arrived, and with it came a quiet transformation. Madison and Tyler's backyard, once marked by tension, bloomed with joy. The oak tree stood taller somehow, wrapped in garlands, surrounded by folding chairs that had all found their place again. But this time, they weren't just guests. They were witnesses, friends, neighbors who brought crock pots and paper lanterns, who strung lights and set up tables without being asked. One man brought ribs, another offered to DJ. A grandmother baked 6 pies. Someone even crafted a wooden sign that read, "No bylaws today, only blessings." And when Madison stepped beneath the tree in her wedding dress, real this time, flowing and perfect, there was no letter, no clipboard, no interruption. Just love. She and Tyler exchanged vows under open skies, with official permits posted proudly on the fence and not a single HOA board member in sight. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a reminder. Community doesn't come from policy. It comes from people. And that day, the people chose joy.